Well, hello again, and welcome to another edition of Beverly's Times Past. With us this evening, two old friends of times past, Mr. Harold Boothroyd and Mr. Richard Sims. Welcome to our program, fellas, and it's nice to have you on again. We've enjoyed each of you in past shows, and this evening we're going to talk a little bit about the history of the railroad, and more specifically, I guess, the era of the steam engine, and some of the happenings of the railroad industry as it pertained to the greater Beverly area. And this is really like having Curator's Corner here, as I was mentioning to you earlier, Dick. Harold, you are the caretaker of the Benjamin Conant collection over in the Wenham Museum Historical Society. And Richard, you take good care of the Lawrence Breed Walker collection, which is housed down at the Beverly Historical Society. Why don't we start our program by having each of you say a brief word or two about each of your fine collections. And Harold, we'll start with you.
Okay. I think this happened in the late 60s when my wife was involved with the House Committee at the Wenham Historical. And she was up in the attic scouting around. She noticed these box of glass plate negatives. And she says, I think those are negatives, you know. And she knew that I was kind of a nut about looking over negatives and seeing what was going on. So she came home and told me, and that's what fired off the whole thing. And let's say, right now, it was 3,600 glass plate negatives, but we have amassed some A.B. Norton ones with it, and now it's about 3,700 glass plate negatives.
And among the collection are some fine photographs that he took down around the Depot Square area.
Well, I think this is what motivated me in getting into it. And once you get your foot in the water, it's hard to get out.
Absolutely. And as we will discover and find out as this program progresses, you as a young man in high school and shortly thereafter took a series of amazing pictures, really, Harold. They're just terrific photographs of steam engines as they were plotting their way through the local area here.
Right.
And we're gonna see a lot of those photographs as we go along in the show.
Great.
Richard, the Lawrence Breed Walker collection. Now there's a fine collection, perhaps one of the finest of its kind in the whole area. I do say so.
That came to us in 1969, Ed. What happened was the gentleman that had been doing this his whole life as a hobby passed away, and he had made provisions to leave his collection of photographs to Beverly Historical Society. And that was in August of 1969, and we've been working on it every Wednesday night since then. We being a group of several volunteers, and we've added a lot to it, obviously, in that length of time. And it's a collection which covers not only railroading but all forms of New England transportation.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
right. Great resource.
A few times I've been down there. You fellows are having a terrific time down there on Wednesday nights,
Oh yeah, we managed to have a lot of fun and get something done too.
collating all those fine photographs. Harold, you're taking many of the negatives and reproducing them for the files down there.
What I'm doing is that as he scouts out some very interesting negatives in New England here and is able to borrow them, then I seem to get involved with printing them up. So this gives the collection some nice photographs, similar to what we see tonight.
Surely. Well, to begin, I think we ought to talk about the history, the earliest history of the railroad as it pertains to the Beverly area. So, Richard, would you like to maybe say a few words? And
Well,
Harold?
sure. To keep it simple and keep it brief, basically the railroad came through Beverly about 1839. It was the Eastern Railroad, and they wanted to build from Boston, obviously, and come out to the area north of Boston toward Newburyport and eventually Portsmouth. And what happened was, after the necessary bond issues were floated and what have you, and the politicians got everything straightened out as to what part of what town they were going to go through, construction actually began. And when we compare it with things that go on today, it was rather rapid. They were all the way through in a couple of years, all the way to Portsmouth. And you say, gee, if they can do that back then, you know, with horses and human beings for power, why can't we get train service back to Newburyport today when the tracks are still there? You know, but that's a story for another time.
It is, yeah.
But essentially, it was the Eastern Railroad, not the Boston and Maine. The Boston and Maine was a company that operated further west than our area, and the Eastern was the line that came through Beverly.
Okay, Harold, can you add a word or two there?
Well, I look at this, and one of the things that came to my attention was they had a very serious accident north of Hamilton and Wenham, where two locomotives did a head-on job, and this was because we had single track. And things didn't happen too fast back then, but it was in 1872, it was 1864, I think, no, 62. 1862 was when the accident occurred, and it wasn't till 1872 where they felt that they better get another track going north so that you wouldn't get any more head-on collisions.
Sure, I imagine. The first depot, Richard, was located down around the Congress Street area.
That's right, because essentially the area where the station is today on Rantoul Street was nothing but sort of a backwater of town. The Commerce area was where Cabot Street is, of course, and so as you came over the Beverly-Salem Bridge, the first landing you made in Beverly was right where the Congress Street area is now, and so that's where they put the depot.
As we
Also, that was early settlements.
That's right.
Yeah,
Sure.
like
Goat Hill.
Lake Hill,
Yeah,
Goat
Hill. That's right.
and they progressed going
Up the hill.
up the hill.
Right.
And the house, as we see in the picture, we're looking at this fine old photograph of the first depot, the building. The house no longer exists, Richard.
I don't believe so. I've been down and scouted around the area, and I don't see anything that looks like it, even if it's greatly altered. Usually you can pick something out. It has certain lines that are the same, and I don't see anything like it in that area up around Ellingwood Court.
Yeah. So as we became more civilized, more settled, the need for another depot became apparent. And Harold, they moved it a little bit down the track to our present site, which is what we call the Beverly Depot today.
You know, I think also industry was spreading out that way, especially the shoe industry. And there are a lot of shoe manufacturing. This is where Benny Conant and Wellington Poole actually worked in a shoe factory in Beverly. So they had to take the trolley to Beverly to work and back home at night to Wenham.
Yeah, there would be little doubt, I would think, that the main reason for the United Shoe settling in this area, or building in this area, was because of the railroad facilities.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I'm told that they really use the railroad rather exclusively for their supplies, both passenger-wise and machinery-wise. They depended on the railroad more so than trucking.
Yeah, I think we're the very fact that it went through Lynn, which was another big shoe manufacturing outfit, that's what United Shoe Machinery Corporation come to feed all this area of shoe machinery.
Well, now, how many depots, Rich, do we have?
There were 5 in the whole town. You had the main station, of course, where it is today, after the Congress Street affair was given up. And then on the main line headed north, you had the station at North Beverly, which is, again, where the present T-stop is today. Then later on, the Gloucester branch had 3 stations of their own, the station at Montserrat, again, where the present T-stop is, Pride's, and Beverly Farms.
And they remain there today as our depot.
That's right.
Stops today. Harold, what about the main line versus the sideline, trunk line, or what would you call it, going to Newburyport, was it, or Portsmouth?
Oh, the
versus the Gloucester line.
Well, the main line to Newburyport was long before they got into doing, well, the Gloucester line itself, a single track along the Gloucester line was in 1847, believe it or not.
So that was 7 years after the main line went through.
Yes, but the amazing part is that they didn't double track it until just before 1900 sometime.
I think they like to pinch pennies. The Eastern was never known for spending money. They were the last railroad to have telegraphic train orders.
But once again, it seemed to be a forced issue because of the accident that happened let's say, east of Montserrat.
To double track, you mean?
Sure. Yeah, in other words, when you get 2 head-on collisions, they figured that maybe you need another track, one going inboard and one going outboard.
Yeah.
True.
But you say that the Portsmouth line was the original line, or the
Eastern
line.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
And from right here in Beverly, there is a branch off that goes through Beverly Farms, and
that's what they call the Gloucester branch, which ended in Gloucester for quite a while.
I see.
They didn't go on to Rockport till later.
And for some reason they chose Beverly as the place to make that.
It just made a natural place to switch off.
Yeah. I think it probably gets. They figure what the mileage is and do a little route checking. At one time, I remember when they built the Essex branch, there was thoughts of going to Gloucester from Essex, but due to many things like crossing the river and a few other things, it didn't seem to be, the best route to go.
There was some major hills in the way too,
I think they pick a route that you don't have to do too much blasting and too much digging.
Right. Sure.
Yeah.
Well, there's no doubt that the modern-day railroad has streamlined their routes. I mean, they're not as many and varied as they used to be. Prime example of that, Harold, would be down in Depot Square, Hamilton, where once upon a time you could go to Essex from the square or in the other direction to Asbury Grove.
Right.
No longer possible today.
No.
Well, why don't we get right into these pictures now? We have a grand total of some 80 or so photographs, all of which I'm sure we will not see in this first program, Rich.
No.
But we'll try for as many of them as we can, and we're going to start here in Beverly. We're going to focus in on the Beverly Depot areas, although there will be pictures from other locales within the city. And we're going to start up in North Beverly around the year of 1890, Richard.
This photograph we used in the book North Beverly Remembered, simply because it was such a good picture of the North Beverly Depot area with a train in the station. And it does date to the 1890 period. The train in the station is headed by a locomotive typical of that period. It's number 51, named Saxon, S-A-X-O-N. And that particular engine was built by the Manchester Locomotive Works in Manchester, New Hampshire in 1872 and ran until the Boston and Maine scrapped it in 1909. And the picture is also interesting in that it shows you many things. If you look on the right side, you can see Dodge's Row. going off into the distance beyond the railroad crossing sign. And down in the lower left corner, you can see one rail of the horse car line up to Hamilton and Wenham. So it shows you a lot of things. It's interesting in many aspects.
Yeah. And these would be horse car tracks?
Oh,
Harold?
definitely, 1890. They didn't have the electric car tracks until 1896.
6 years later. Yeah.
But it also might be interesting to mention that the line along here was on the right-hand side till it got to the top of Pond Hill, and then it switched over to the left-hand side of the road.
Yeah, the trolley line.
Trolley
line.
line.
Yes.
And the poles do to this day.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Right. The area has no doubt changed. Obviously, it has changed considerably.
Without need to say.
We won't get into that. But the next series of photographs dwell on a rather serious accident in 1892 that took place just over the Paradise Crossing area. And Harold, where for our audience, where is Paradise Crossing here in Beverly?
Well, it's somewhere between Montserrat and Pride's Crossing, and just where there are roads that cross over.
You go down Cross
And
Lane.
I don't know whether it's
Cross Lane and
it's just a little bit
onto
before my
Foster
time,
Street.
so I can't tell you exactly.
There really is no such place today. It apparently was a small dirt lane, and I don't even think it exists anymore.
I think it just crossed over. I can remember that we used to go that way to Beverly Farms.
Yeah.
We used to go down Essex Street and then take a little thing that went across.
Yes,
and they call
it's
that
still pretty
Paradise.
countryish down there now,
Yeah.
even today.
Yeah, and there's an S curve there where you cannot see very far in either direction when you're on the railroad track,
And
and
this
that's
is where
one
it
of the
all
things
happened.
that led to that accident.
Okay. You want to talk a little bit about this, Rich?
It was something that is so typical of railroading in that era. It's called a cornfield meet. In other words, two trains would meet in a cornfield because of a mix-up in running orders or whatever on a single-track line. And the old joke was that they were running on smoke orders. In other words, they ran till they saw smoke coming in the other direction and they knew they were on the wrong track. Well, that's what's happened here. You had a single track. You had a passenger train inbound to Boston in the late afternoon coming from Gloucester. And you had a freight extra coming from Salem back to Gloucester with a boxcar load of horses. And he was supposed to have taken a siding at Montserrat and wait for the inbound passenger train to pass him at that point, but for some reason decided to push on and try and make it to the next station, which would have been Pride's Crossing, thinking that he had time to get there before the passenger train was due, when in fact it was within 2 or 3 minutes of the time the train was due to leave Beverly Farms, and there was no way that he could have made it.
No.
And that's what caused the accident, and they met right in the middle of the Paradise Crossing S curve.
Head on.
Head on, and pretty much destroyed both locomotives. The only person who was killed was a brakeman on the freight engine who jumped and hit his head on a boulder. Some other people were badly injured, including a few passengers, but the only other fatalities were the horses.
Yeah. Didn't take long for the crowd to get down there, Harold, as we see in the pictures here.
No, I think accidents do attract
Word got out
crowds,
rather quickly here that there was a happening down on the track.
It might also be interesting to note that at this time, 1892, the locomotives not only were numbered, but they also had names. Like the 154, which was the 440, was called Salem.
Took them a while, it says here in the article, to clear the track and restore service. And was this the catalyst? Was this the thing that really got them into double tracking?
Oh, I think so. And
this was the final.
sure. And
It seems to
straw.
be.
Yeah.
you had a lot of wealthy people living down on the Gloucester branch, and I think that they probably had a lot of influence. They certainly didn't want to get involved in one of these head-ons. And I think that probably was as much a factor as anything in getting the railroad to hustle this along.
The question that comes into my mind, how would they communicate, engineer to station or central, location? Would there be
Oh, yeah,
Morse
yeah.
code?
Telegraph
Yeah,
system
by this
and then
time,
train orders.
train orders,
see.
Yeah.
right? They were actually, a telegraph order message would be sent to the nearest station agent, and he would write that down on a piece of paper and actually hand it physically to the engine crew. And that's how they ran, especially on one of these single track lines.
Right. Well, as we said earlier, thank goodness, but one fatality here. This could have been a major.
Oh, indeed. It could have been
Major
far worse if they'd been going faster, or if the freight locomotive had been a big engine instead of a little 040 switcher. It could have been a much more loss of life involved.
Yep.
One side light to this is that we actually have a piece of the bell from the little switch engine, and we have a piece of window sash from the baggage car at the Historical Society. And it might be interesting to show those too.
Okay, through the magic of cutaways.
The magic of cutaways, yeah.
This next photo is of interest to me, and we inserted this at the last moment here. And this is a picture of a bunch of fellows, a crew, track crew here, taking good care of, we might say, of the lines, of the railroad lines. And the fellow that's standing second from the right is my grand-uncle, Edmund Giles Josephs, and for whom I am named, and so I'm quite proud of this picture. Where was this taken, Rich?
It's funny because this picture we had given to us a couple of years ago by a lady whose father was the second on the left, Michael Cronin, and she gave us this picture. It was taken on Elliott Street, right just past the crossing, you can see in the background. And this was a section crew, and they would be in charge of maintaining a section of track. That's where the word came from. And they'd patrol that section each day and drive in loose spikes and fix any track that was out of alignment or replace ties, that sort of thing. And their mode of transport was this pump hand car that you actually pumped up and down by hand. As you can see the handle there.
One fella, Harold, on one end, and the other fellow on the other end, and pumping away like mad, huh? The thing would propel itself down the track. My granduncle, Ed, here, told me before he passed on, and I was a youngster when he did pass away, but he told me that he was a gardener for the railroad, and his job was to go down to the various depot areas, and especially in the summertime, and maintain the shrubbery and the plants and the grass, and keep everything rather nicely tuned in for the people to enjoy as they waited for trains. That's something we don't see today.
Well, around the gay tender shacks, a lot of times they had flowers. You know, it's like one of those massive plantings all around.
A little nicety that we don't somehow have the time for today.
They do get dusty after a while.
Well, the railroad was important in that day and age, and you know, was looked on by all the community members as being probably the predominant thing in town, and that's why they did that sort of thing.
Sure. A nice, lusty bunch of fellas here, Harold. They all look like they could take care of themselves, don't they?
And then some.
And where did you say this was, Rich, again?
This was at Elliott Street crossing on the main line. That's right down across from where the parking lot for Reed Brothers, the former Reed Brothers, is there, which is where that house is in the background on the left.
Good enough. Good enough. Now, 1900, a Boston-bound train at Montserrat, Rich, and you have a little story about that ivy that's growing there.
Yeah, Montserrat Depot for many years had a thick growth of ivy on each one of those uprights supporting the platform canopy, and that's nice. It makes the station look good. But we noticed in one picture, in fact, I guess it was a railroad publicity photo, that the ivy was all rolled down to the bottom, and they were painting the station. So apparently that you could unroll all those rows of ivy and just lay them right flat on the ground, and then after the paint dried, you'd heist them back up again like a flag on a pole and hook them up to the top, and they'd be good until the next paint job.
That sounds reasonable,
A
Harold.
lot of this stuff did a twist around, too.
That's right.
And I imagine they just unraveled it and laid it down and unraveled it back up again.
The thing here that strikes me is the absence of trees, and this was not long to be because, as I understand it, Mr. Henry Peabody was soon to take up residence in this area, and he is responsible for all of it.
Yep.
Even today, you can see some of the vestiges of his tree planting.
That's right. Yeah, it was pretty barren when this was taken.
It sure was.
It might be interesting also to point out that the lantern to light the area there was quite typical of those they used in stations. And I have a globe at home of one of those station lanterns.
What are we talking, gas, kerosene here? Or?
It's probably kerosene.
Kerosene.
Yeah, I would think so.
Okay. Now, Harold, we have next a photograph here, and this is a real eye-opener for me. I had never seen this one. This, as we know, the United Shoe was being constructed in the year of 1903, and this picture is dated 11/1/1903, and we see the very foundations of the shoe buildings here.
That's exactly what it is, foundations. And to the right is the mainline track. And if you notice, there's a gantry both on this side and the southern side, and one on the northern side, and a great big cable between the two. And this was for probably transporting building materials to the area. This was quite typical of the structure of the building, where this was one of the first buildings that they poured concrete and also had iron reinforcing rods all throughout, such that even the floors were such that you could, drive heavy machinery and over the floors with no damage.
So these gantries here, they were on the track itself, and they
were on a special track.
Yeah, a little narrow gauge track.
This was a track that was put there during the building and yanked down after the building.
So they could go left and right, and then the cable went north and south.
Yeah.
Imagine the cast of thousands that were to build this.
Lots of
structure.
Italian immigrants. In fact, that's pretty much where the Italian community in Beverly originated, is at the time of the United Shoe. Thousands.
Beckford, Bennett.
Right, thousands of people worked on this project.
And most of them were masons anyway, stone masons. And they probably worked for less money than the people in Beverly did.
Right, and as we said earlier, not without risk. Many of them were to, well, not many, but a goodly few were to lose their lives here, putting the structure up.
Indeed.
You didn't worry about that if you happened to get caught.
That was the
that was the end of that.
The roll of the dice. Yep.
Right now we have all kinds of insurance.
Sure. Okay,
frauds of insurance.
We're up to 1905, Harold. This is your photograph here. And we're looking at the United Shoe, and 3 years later, it's up and going.
This was one of the glass plate negatives that I discovered at the United Shoe, and is now at the Smithsonian. They have given them the major portion of the collection. And this happens to be it's a switching locomotive, and it's an 040, and it's what it's doing. It's assembling a freight train with cars that are going to go to Craddock Terry, and Craddock Terry was a rather large manufacturer of shoes, and what they're doing is they're loading the boxcars with United Shoe machinery to go to Craddock Terry. So this is going to be a freight train which eventually would drop these off at Craddock Terry.
Now, as we look at this picture, Rich, would these tracks run along what is now the Ball Street Playground?
Yes.
And back between the playground and the shoe buildings?
That's right, and this picture was taken from about where the footbridge used to cross the track.
Where they used to go over.
Right, which is not there anymore.
No.
But again, it's 1905, and look at the progress that they made on the building in, in the 3 years, 2 years actually, here, from 03 to 05.
That's right.
Things moved fast.
Didn't take them long.
Amazing.
Okay, next we're up at Montserrat Depot, Rich, and let's see, are we at President Taft's train here?
When President Taft had his summer White House in Beverly, he obviously came here by train and had his own private cars and his own Secret Service and traveling entourage and what have you. And this picture was taken right at the depot at Montserrat. You're looking toward downtown Beverly from Essex Street crossing. And you'll notice that the locomotive has got white flags on the front of it, which designates this as an extra train, and you can see that again on the headlight up in front of the smokestack. There's an X number up there, X906, 906 being the locomotive number. This is extra 906. So that's just to run the president down from Boston out to Montserrat. They've probably taken the entire branch, if not the entire eastern division for the day, because the locomotive is facing outbound on the inbound track. So quite likely nothing else even turned a wheel on this whole branch during the course of this trip.
Where might this engine have turned around, Rich, as they did turn,
you could
turn
turn
around
it
those
Beverly.
days?
You could probably back down to Beverly Yard and turn there. That would have been the closest turntable.
I see. And the president would have gotten off the train here and perhaps proceeded down Corning Street.
Yep.
And if he was staying at Parramatta later on, there he was, or he went further down to Lynch Park.
That's
or,
right,
which
Burgess
was
Point.
Burgess Point in those days.
That's right.
Okay. President William Taft. Now, the next group of pictures here that that we have is of great interest to me, anyway, because it significantly shows the transition of Gloucester Crossing in vivid portrait. I think here we have a series of 4 pictures that we're going to reflect on for just a moment. And the first one is dated 1911. Harold, would you start us off here?
Yeah, this is probably the most dramatic change as I remember it, and it's looking north, and the Colin Street is coming in at the right, and Cabot Street is coming down towards, and Rantoul Street goes off to the left, and there's a glimpse of a large building, at least 2 to 3 story, on the extreme left here, and that was Macaulay's drugstore.
Later it became
so that gives
Joe
you
Macaulay's,
a little
right.
bit. But it's amazing some of the houses that are gone, and the width of the street has changed, and
Right.
There's so many changes. That
Right. Well, the reason, Rich, that we're including these, obviously it's a railroad crossing, and it pertains to what we're dealing with here, but take a look at the next picture here, and we're only maybe 10 or 15 years possibly later on, and look how it's changed.
Sure. Sure. Well, obviously you've got one thing different, and that's the fact that the road is paved in the later shot. The earlier shot, it's still dirt. The trolley tracks are still there, but they're much more obvious in the newer picture in the 1920s. You're looking in the exact opposite direction, first to second shot here.
kind of up Cabot Street.
Up Cabot in the 1911 shot, and then down Cabot in the 1920s shot.
Yeah.
Colin's off to the left and Rantoul's off to the right.
Right.
And this trolley track that's coming into the foreground would run right through Wenham,
Yep.
North Beverly, Wenham,
Yep.
I-
Yep.
and Hamilton.
Yep.
Ending where, Harold? At Depot Square?
I don't know when they backed the thing off, but I imagine in the early 30s, things kind of backed off to. I can remember when they really stopped at Gloucester Crossing.
Yes.
And they didn't.
Late 20s, I
They didn't
believe.
go any farther down.
Right.
Yeah.
But when they did run, they ran as far as Depot Square, and then they sidetracked down to Asbury Grove.
Oh yeah. So that was when when the whole thing
Sure.
got going. Yeah.
And incidentally, the building that we see here straight on, which is now the L&G, or the former L&G package store, the Cornerstone package store, that was the A&P building.
Oh, is that right?
That was the A&P building, and we can just make out the logo here on
heaven's sake.
on the sign in front. So that's where they began, and of course they were later to move uptown.
That's right.
And then come back
And come
down
back and right across the street.
Sure.
That's right.
Absolutely.
There's also on the extreme right on that same thing. It looks like there's a drugstore there. I wonder if that was Macaulay's first.
That is the Macaulay building, Harold, right there.
Yeah, I know it, but I mean, go across the street and you see a drugstore sign, and
Yeah.
it looks like drugs.
No, I think he moved later on. I think the Macaulay business was moved later on over. across
As
the-
I remember it, Macaulay was in the large building.
Yep.
But I still see
Something was over there.
Something was over
Might have
there,
been.
and it said drugs, and it had the modern pestle
Right.
sign.
Yeah.
Okay, now, there's a nice picture looking down the track here, the Gloucester Branch track, and your alma mater and mine, Harold, is in the background there.
And mine.
And yours.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
That's
mine.
right, Rich.
Yep.
Old Beverly High School, which is
Yeah.
down the Briscoe.
Yeah.
And the last picture that we have is a look back into Gloucester Crossing, and again we see the Macaulay building, and
And that answers the sign question. You can see the drug sign.
Yeah.
That was on the corner, and it stuck out in the street from Macaulay's on the corner.
Right.
Yep.
Okay, back to our journey here. We're up to item 7. And this is supposedly, it says here, Rich, President Taft's train in his car, which was called the Mayflower, dated 1909.
It may and it may not be. We're not really sure. This picture came to us along with several others, including the one that we just looked at of President Taft's train at Montserrat. This, unfortunately, is so vague that it could be most anything, but there's definitely some kind of a different car on the rear end here of this 3-car train. It is an extra because you can see the white flags flying on the locomotive. So it's either the president's train or it's an extra run for one of the millionaires that live down the branch, such as Henry Clay Frick or Judge Moore or one of those
What was the
social
name you
types.
gave to those trains in an earlier program, the Dude trains?
The Dude, the North Shore Dude, the limited parlor car only trains, that just carried the well-to-do, and it was non-stop from Beverly into Boston.
Yeah. Any comments there, Harold? Or shall we?
I haven't heard of that dude thing before.
That's Richard's.
That wasn't its real name. Its real
No,
name was
I
the
know.
Flying Fisherman, but they called it the Dude.
Well, you mentioned something about how, to use your words, that the local gentry did not want to ride with the riffraff.
Oh, absolutely not. No, they paid big money to charter this special train, just in the summer only, thank you.
Harold, this is a last-minute addition to our show here tonight. Would you say a word about this one, 7A?
Well, this is kind of interesting. It depicts pretty much the memories that I have of the Beverly Station before it was changed over for an eating establishment. And this train coming in looks like somewhere around 1900-ish, 1910, because of the headlight on it. And the dress costume, I had to ask my wife. She says it's probably more around 1910. So
that'd be pretty accurate, I'm sure. And off to the right, we see Park Street, I believe, and some of the buildings along there that no longer stand.
Some of those are shoe factories.
Yes, definitely. They all have the same shoe factory look, probably built by the same builder.
Well, now we're up in North Beverly, Rich, in 1911. What do we have here?
We've got what looks to be probably a train that went as far as perhaps Portsmouth or Newburyport, not a through train, because by 1911, trains that went further than that had been given over to larger types of locomotives. And so we suspect this is probably a fairly local train. And it stopped right just beyond the station, which is out of sight at the right. And in the background, there's a board fence, and you can see some kind of a car parked in behind there, a freight car, and that's probably on the side track, which was in there on the far end of the North Beverly Station area for many years.
Harold, the engineers rode pretty much exposed to the weather, didn't they, back in those days?
It isn't as bad as the early days when they didn't even have a cab.
Yeah. But I see him sticking his head out the window here.
Yeah, that's the fireman.
Oh, I see.
They have, they have windows in the front, they have windows in the side, so they can doctor them any way they want.
Never having ridden up in one of those cabs, but to me that doesn't seem like the best view of the track that you might possibly have, but I suppose that was under the...
Well,
it isn't bad.
It isn't bad. You had the boiler, which stuck way out so that the engineer couldn't see anything to his left, and the fireman couldn't see anything to the right, and especially if you were going around a curve. Picture being in the locomotive, you're sitting on the right-hand side, as the engineer did, and you're on a long curve swinging around to the left. You can't see a thing that's coming toward you. You depend on your fireman to tell you what's over on that side. It was definitely a two-man job.
So there was a fella looking out both windows.
That's correct, and calling signals back and forth, which each acknowledged to the other when they repeated it.
I see. Okay. Next, we're at the Beverly car yard, I believe this is, Rich, in 1912. And Harold, we have some names here that you might like to read off to our viewers.
I can read some of them. I think it's missing on some of them.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, left to right, C. Dockham, he was the brakeman, and nicknamed Baldy Goodwin, another brakeman. Mike Birmingham was the conductor. Charles Fowler was the engineer, And I don't know what the last one is.
I do. That's Ben Flanders, and he was the fireman. And I had the pleasure of interviewing Benjamin Franklin Flanders at age 95 or something like that.
Wow.
And he was a resident of Hamilton. And he was one of the oldest of 3 surviving Boston and Maine enginemen in 1979 when I interviewed him on tape.
Wow.
And he passed away 3 months after that.
Isn't that something?
Quite a gentleman.
Isn't that something? Well, with a name like Baldy Goodwin, I suppose you had to wear a hat at all times, Harold, huh?
Oh, yeah.
Well,
Keep your head warm.
yeah. Wigwam.
Yeah. It's interesting here. This was scrapped in 1912. It wasn't around all that long.
That's right. That was right at the end of its career.
A real old-timer, as we would say here. Okay. We come into the United Shoe Yard here. Pictures dated April 2, 1921. And we have 2 which must have been taken within literally seconds of each other.
I was going to say, it looks like the same train.
Yeah, I would say so. Harold, why don't you comment on item 10 here, first picture? And
well, this is a view looking at the junction of Elliott Street and McKay. And if you'll notice in the background, the tidal water comes in, and it's now a parking lot. So this was filled in, and then they had the shoe ponds, which were probably started out tidal water and then ended up, regular unsalted stuff.
Yeah.
And the locomotive definitely is bringing the workers in the morning, because that's the side that the sun would shine on. And somebody come in with looks like a little old Model T there. And there's some guys that look like they're holding some round disc, and it was probably to stop, for people. This locomotive, when it was going, it would probably pull farther into the yard, and they had to stop people from walking and driving the car.
Yeah.
You recognize the building. It still looks pretty much the same. That's on the extreme right, and that little tank type thing right in the middle is, I understand, was a transformer that got pretty warm, so they had a bucket where they kept water in it, and it helped water cool the transformer.
Rich, anything to add to this first one?
Not really, except that you can tell, certainly as of April 2nd, 1921, the date this was taken, that getting to the shoe by train was far more popular than getting there by automobile. There's virtually no place to park. You'll notice that, as Harold pointed out in the background, what is now part of the parking area was all tidewater, and in the foreground is still rock outcroppings. There was no parking lot as such. So the predominant way of getting in and out of the shoe for the workers at that time was by train. They actually had their own station platform.
And the train would come in from Point South, would it not?
That's right. It would come in from the Federal Street area and take a siding and come down along where McPherson Drive is today, and then swing into where the Shoe Foundry building is on the other side of Elliott Street, and come out through where the fence there is, across Elliott Street and into the parking lot.
Yeah. But again, the workers, a majority of them would live in that area.
Oh yeah, from Boston, Chelsea, Lynn, sure.
Yep.
This also might be interesting to note that the locomotive is what they call a 10-wheeler, and when I was taking photographs in the United Shoe, they were usually American types. They were, much less power.
Yeah. Yeah. The outcropping of ledge looks like McKay Street.
That is.
Yes.
That's exactly where
McKay
that is.
Street would be going along there today. And one other thing that strikes me here, look at the way these people are dressed.
Oh yeah.
They all have coats and
probably ties.
on. Going to work manual labor
in a factory.
Yep.
Sure.
Isn't
Well,
that
there was
something?
pride back in those days.
Isn't that something? Okay, next picture. We're back in the.
It looks like the locomotive had come in, and now the cars are unloading the passengers, and they're heading for the work. So I think it's the same day, same train.
Sure.
Probably.
Yep, minutes apart from each other.
Yeah.
Next photo, we're back in the yard again. Would this be the engineer, Rich? Or?
Yeah, probably it's maybe the fireman, because I see a man hanging out the right-hand side of the cab, so this might be the fireman. This is the afternoon train getting ready to take the workers home. You'll notice they're facing the opposite direction. The shoe building's behind them, and they're facing outward. So they've backed in there sometime in the afternoon, and they're getting ready for the outbound flow of workers to take them home.
Yeah. Now, we've mentioned the term engineer, fireman, brakeman. Can we just take a minute and define each of these fellows in terms of what they do or what they did on the train?
The engineer was the boss of the engine.
Number one man.
And he actually was throttle, brake, and that. The fireman primarily took care of keeping the coal. Earlier it used to be wood, but most of the time here it's coal.
Keeping the oven stoked.
Yeah, keeping it stoked so that they can get up ahead of steam. Most of these tea kettles probably ran from somewhere around 200 pounds per square inch steam.
I see. I see. And there were a varied amount of them. Every picture, Rich, seems to have a different number on the car siding that we have in this collection here. So there were many, many engines.
Oh, sure. Each class of locomotives, for instance,
through.
might have been in the hundreds and had that many numbers, sure. And at first glance, they all look alike, but in reality, each was slightly different. There were no two exactly alike.
Okay, 1921 at the United Shoe.
Right, which
Now,
is a good companion to the two earlier pictures.
But I think 1911 did a lot of rearrangement of numbers.
That's right.
Yeah.
They were all renumbered.
Before that, anything could be anything.
Yep, they tried to standardize the numbering in 1911, and they renumbered everything within a 2-month period.
Wow. Okay, January 2, 1928, we're at Beverly Depot. Harold?
Well, this is an outbound train heading for North Beverly. It looks like a Pacific locomotive, so they got a few cars on it. And if it's in 28, I can remember some of the, like the large building at the left was the old Bond Hotel.
This is it right here. Yep.
And the building at the top of, was off of Park Street, and that was a leather factory.
Okay. And in those days, the Beverly Depot had a pavilion-type structure on both sides of the
I
track.
think it showed good in the postcard.
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
Yep. That has since disappeared.
I know, I call them canopies, I suppose.
Yeah, canopy is a good word for that.
Yeah.
Any comments, Rich, before we move on here?
Yeah, the Bond Hotel. Every railroad station in any town of even modest size had at least one hotel within a spit of the railroad station. And these were railroad hotels, as far as I'm concerned, because all the salesmen would get off the train and had to have some place to stay with their big cases of samples and whatever they lugged around with them. Drummers, they used to call them. And so some of the largest cities had 2 or 3 of these hotels within an easy walk from the train depot. And in a lot of cases, if you look around where a station is or was, you'll find a building today which is either now apartments or some kind of a use like that, which was very obviously a railroad hotel. And there's at least 3 that I can think of right here in Beverly. This one, which still stands, the Park Hotel, which was the Park Place restaurant, and which is now some Italian restaurant.
Just up the street.
Just up the street. And then further up Railroad Avenue, there was the Hotel Central, which is now a big apartment building on the right side of Railroad Avenue, about at the top of the hill.
We'll have to get our trusty camera out and get a picture of those.
Railroad hotels.
Put them in here. Now, we're moving right along to the, well, we're at the depot still, and it's 1928, June 18. Harold, what do we have here?
Well, I feel that this is probably an era where they did, after 1911, where they did some redecoration of locomotives. This is relatively new locomotive at the time, probably being built in 1910-ish. And it's one of the 3600 Pacific class, and this is the OT 5. And when they did this renumbering and redecoration, they had Boston and Maine on the cab. And this is heading towards North Beverly. One thing that it shows, well, it shows 2 things. It shows the to the left, it shows the gas tanks along the Bass River between River Street and the river. And on the right, it shows the water tank. And there was a pipe, evidently, that brought water to the spouts, such that the locomotives, if they needed a drink, they'd stop here, and the firemen would usually fill the water tanks.
I see. I see. And how was the coal? Was the coal just literally shoveled into the furnace?
That's what the fireman's job was.
That was his job to do that, huh?
Yeah. And it's kind of interesting. You learn to not only throw but fan. You shovel at the same time, and that spread the new coals out such that you didn't get so much black smoke, and you got instant burn. So you can get a good fire roaring then.
Yeah, you needed heat, and you didn't want to smother the fire.
Right.
That was the whole point. And later on, engines had stokers because no single human being could keep up with the demand of firing a large engine with a hand shovel.
Yeah. Well, there it is for posterity.
Mm-hmm.
Captured forever, Harold, with these fine photographs. Now, I see an HB down at the bottom here of this photograph. So
yeah, this is when I started getting wacky with my new camera, and this happens to be we call them shifters. They're actually it's a switching locomotive, an 060, and these little tea kettles jostled around freight cars, you know, taking them out and putting them into buildings. This happens to be something that come up every day to Gove Lumber Company, and they'd either bring in freight cars, cement, or building materials that Gove worked with. So then the old freight car they'd take out and probably go back and fill it again.
Sure. Well, in our next program, I'm going to have you show the audience the very camera that you used to take all of these fine photographs.
Yeah, I still got it being a pack rat.
And we'll be seeing many of those photographs coming along in the next show. Let's try and get a few more in here before it's time to close up. And we're up to item 15, Rich, and we're at the North Beverly Depot, 1935.
Mm-hmm. And this is almost on the same spot as the picture that we were looking at a few minutes ago that was taken in 1911, and it's even the same type of locomotive. It's a different number, but it's the same type. It's an American standard type. And this was taken by Theodore Day, who lived in North Beverly and was a teenage rail nut. And we have to thank him for many of these 1930s vintage train photos.
Trains, buses, trolleys, everything.
Yeah,
you name it.
He
right
took
there.
pictures of it.
Wonderful.
And he's dated this, as I say, 1935, and even had it marked 5:15 p.m. And if that's the case, this is probably the Essex branch.
That's what I was going to say.
Train.
It's the Essex branch.
Yeah.
Okay. Next up, we have a 1936 picture. Ted Day again. Rich?
Yeah, Ted Day, of course, lived right up the street from here and took many pictures at this location, and some of them are not the greatest quality because he just had a cheap little box camera at that time. This one is interesting because it shows a train just coming over the Dodge Street crossing, headed inward toward Boston. And the most interesting part of this is the close-up of the hand crank gate mechanism, which you see right in the left foreground. And you can even see the cranks on it, the crank handles. And the gate tender's shanty is just out of the picture behind the photographer to his left. And one man would come out and grab those cranks, pull off a couple of rings and chains that held them so that they didn't turn by themselves. And in only about, what, Harold, 2 or 3 turns, these 4 enormous gates, 2 on each side of the street, and some of them were 25 feet long.
They were geared such that one guy, he developed both arms, but developed wood, and he'd keep it in sequence.
And they'd come down and back up, and of course they had counterweights, which are these big iron things on the side here, which you could add to them like you do weights that you lift. And that made it a lot easier. But they had a series of rods under the street, under the pavement, that turned the ones on the far side. Amazing mechanism when you consider that had to work in the winter when it was below 0, in the summer when it was 100 degrees. That these didn't kink up or snap under the street or what have you. And of course today that's all gone, and the railroad employed literally thousands of men over the years as crossing tenders at every grade crossing at every town from here to creation.
Hardy souls.
Hardy souls, and a lot of them were former operating men who had been injured or were almost pensioners at this point.
Yeah.
So it was a little side income for them to assume this duty.
Well, instead of dumping them, they gave them a job.
They gave them a job as long as they could stand it.
And of course this would be Dodges Road going
That's
up.
Dodges Road crossing.
Right.
Okay, very quickly now, let's do a couple more here.
Okay.
September 5, 1936, Beverly, Mass. I assume down at Beverly Depot, Harold.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Oh yes, I see now.
Because there's Pope's Lumber in the background.
That's what I was going to say. It's heading into Boston.
Okay.
And you can see the signal. I just had to orient myself to the right.
Yeah, you're looking outward.
That little building is right on the Water Street and what was it? Bridge Street.
Bridge Street.
Right on the corner.
Right at the corner of River Street Bridge.
It is still standing, and it's part of Monahan's
Monahan,
lumber company.
That's
probably
right.
his office building.
That's right.
1936.
Yeah.
Okay. We're back up to North Beverly in 37, Rich.
And again, another Ted Day classic, and this shows the depot full front-on view from the track side, and you'll notice that these little advertising signs now are beginning to pop up all over the stations, which the railroad made a little money on. And that was a phenomena that began in the early 30s and lasted right up until the end. And the train is outward bound, probably going to Portsmouth, and is being pulled by an Atlantic-type locomotive.
Okay, as much as I don't want to, and we don't want to, we're going to stop here and call it a program as we're nearing our time. And we have tons of pictures to go, and we'll get right to them in our next program. I want to thank you, fellas, both. Harold Boothroyd, curator of the Benjamin Conant collection at the Wenham Historical Society and Museum, and Richard Sims, the curator of the fine collection, the Walker collection, Lawrence Breed Walker collection at the Beverly Historical Society, from which many of these photographs are coming to us today. We're going to look forward to having you both back very soon, and we'll continue with another part to our look back onto the steam era, the railroad as it used to be, times gone by, and gone forever, Harold.
Yeah, indeed.
Afraid so.
Okay. Well, we thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for being with us this evening, and we hope you'll join us again when we next bring you another edition of Beverly's Times Past. This is Ed Joseph saying so long for now.